Okay, we'll get started with a little introduction to digital sculpture. We're going to start with two programs. We're going to use SculptGL and Sculptress. They're both free to download. I've provided the PC link and Mac link. SculptGL, of course, just runs through the browser, so it doesn't require any installation whatsoever. You can, if you have an iPad and Apple Pencil, use Nomad Sculpt, which is the full commercial version of it. Sculptress on a PC does not work on a couple computers. I've tried different versions on Windows, maybe 1 out of 10. It seems like the Mac Link DMG so far, I haven't heard of any problems, but you can run this as a tiny application. You can run it on a really old computer, such as so little. And you just have a few keys to remember here. So when we use SculptGL, it's just the numerical keys. You're going to go through the brush. So it's 1, 4, 5, 7, and 0. So the main brush tool, the clay buildup, the smooth brush, which is always a shift function in both applications, the flatten brush, and the crease brush and move. We were going to grab move. Here's the toggles for all the main interface. E is going to be your main translate tool. You can always invert the brush. Alt does the opposite. So if you're building up, holding Alt will push down the clay. Or vice versa, if your default of the brush is to push down the clay, Alt will bring the clay up. X to edit the radius, and C for the intensity. So it's a really simple interface here. Controls are masking. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. Here's your top left front views and arrow keys. The pan, Alt plus camera move, and zoom, Control plus camera move. We'll alternate back and forth between those as well. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So yeah, Alt and left mouse click to pan, Alt, and if I click and then let go of Alt, I can zoom in and out. Same thing with the right mouse button, either way works. W is your wireframe, so you want to see where your wireframes are at. All this should be pretty standard. You want to save the SculptGL file right here. It's running through the browser. So if you close it, you lose your work. So be sure and save. You can always export or save OBJ, and you can always import OBJ up here. Here's a scene. You can clear it, add a sphere, cube, cylinder, or torus. I use this quite a bit. And you have your tablet pressure here, and here's the background image. You can actually bring a background image in to use as a reference, which is pretty cool. And you have your three main pull down options on the right. So it's extremely simple software. So I'm going to just zoom in here. I'm going through the menu. Rendering material capture. You can play with the materials on here. And there's a PBR, physically based rendering. There's your normal shader. Here's your UV shader. And that gives you the XYZ coordinates. And there's your regular material capture. And underneath that, you have red clay, which has a nice look to it. You have the regular brush is on by default, which is number 1, right? If you look in here, number 1's a regular brush. And if I hold down the Alt key, that will push some of the clay down in there. And you also have skin, hazard usarts. I don't know what that is. Pearl. There's regular clay. I think I'll probably stick with that one. Here's the regular skin and green. A little darker on the edges, a little harder to see with the green on there. And there's your, there's your white. A little harder on the eyes, but you can see with the wireframe on as well. So let's go with the regular clay for now. Okay, so I'm just going to close the rendering menu and we'll go to topology. So here's your resolution. Remember, you have symmetry on by default right here. So if you hover over the top of these, if there's a shortcut key highlighted with it, it should give you a readout for it. So if I go up here to brush, oh, it doesn't. It should list these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 0, should say. And then, yeah, the list control for masking and E for the main transform tool. But as I'm playing around with this, just with the regular clay brush, you can play with your resolution here. So this is really important for digital sculpture. You have multi multi-resolution or multi-subdivision. So each one of these quads, if I go all the way down the bottom, each quad, if I subdivide it one time, each quad becomes 4 quads. And then again, each quad becomes 4 more quads. And again, 4 more quads. And so this one starts off default with 4 subdivisions. You can see the number read up here. The faces is 9,800, or excuse me, 98,000. And my default start off here is 1,500 faces. So times 4 and times 4 and times 4. So yeah, pretty straightforward. But what you can do here, go to the lowest subdivision, is you can go in and you can make major movements and major changes to the form, and it will keep the sculptural detail. So we'll take a look at that. You can remesh it right here with the resolution. This resolution number makes a little sense to me, but if you wanted to remesh it, you can see it'll actually create more detail where maybe you've sculpted some detail. So let me Control Z to undo. Control Z should work. Um, so we'll look at the remesh here for voxel remeshing and the remesh with manifold triangles. If I hit this one, you'll see now instead of quads, it's all triangles. So it's what we call triangulated. So I go in here and let's crank that down to like 63. And again, I don't know if there's, there we go. So we get a little bit of an interesting dynamic here where the quads are not as evenly distributed, but they're better than the mess you might have if you've like really done a lot of detail to your sculpture. So if let's drop the resolution way down to say like 16, and you can manually enter the numbers in there and hit remesh, and there we go. So now you see it's keeping it low poly, but giving us different quads in there. So we'll come back to that. So that's under topology. But let's look at the main sculpting tools. So first one is brush. So if I go in here and I think hold the X key and slide left to right, that's your radius. It says right there is X, intensity is C. So X goes back and forth, and then hold down C, and that goes back and forth with the intensity. So for the first one here, if I sculpting detail, and I always start off with the head or face of some kinds, it's just because it's so fun. And kind of bringing down the chin around like that. You see it's kind of adding layers of clay as we go. If I crank up the resolution back up to here, I'll make the brush a little bit smaller, and let's turn off the wireframe for right now. And you can see it has this nice algorithm here. It actually kind of builds the clay up. So another type of brush we use in ZBrush is called the clay build-up brush. There's a lot of different brushes like that you have access to. Now, as it gets lumpy, if it had lines of strokes kind of building up on each other, if I hold Shift, it's going to very gently stroke across there. It's going to smooth out and kind of average out the surface of the sculpture. So every time I do a few strokes, almost every time I'll hit Shift after a little bit and then bring that back out. Here's bring out the nose and the mandible, and I'm just making like a face. I'm not trying to make anything accurate yet. Just kind of show you how the multi-resolution works. The next most popular one after the first one brush is the 0, which is the move brush. So with wireframe on, what I can do is make a nice big brush, and let's go look at it from like the top down. So it's still way too circular from the top down. So I'm going to go in here from the side view. I'm just going to kind of push the side of the head in, the skull in right there. And you see that's a pretty good move. But if I did it, undo that a couple times. I don't know why I did that. But if I was to go to the resolution, drop it way down like that, and grab and move it, so you have a little bit more control if there's less triangles. It's going to be less mushy and gushy, so to speak, as I push the clay around. And then if I go back up to the resolution and max again, you'll see that it did a good job. It didn't do a lot of surface undulation. So drop your multi-resolution down to the very lowest, like this, to make major changes. So let's do like a, I don't know, like a xenomorph type head, right? The alien, so you can stretch the triangles out. This is where you'll want to re-topologize the triangles. And as I pull them out, I can hold down Shift and I can smooth that out a little bit as I go. This doesn't get lumpy when I can control. You want it to be lumpy and you do it on purpose, that's different than it becoming lumpy because it's doing stuff you don't want it to do. And there you can see the limitations when the triangles, when the quads are long slivers, like a bigger than a 2-to-1 ratio, oftentimes that'll lead to jagged surface topology. So there we go. And if I want to inflate the tip of this, number 2 on the keyboard, we'll switch to the inflate brush. And again, X, make it bigger, and I can kind of blow that end up. So inflate's very, very handy. And then back to 0 and pull it back out some more and pull that up. And shift to smooth out. And yeah, if I wanted to lower, it's on the lowest resolution. It is on the lowest resolution. Okay. And back to 1's my brush, main build-up brush, and you see there is actually a clay buildup here. So we'll talk about the difference between the different way the clay builds up on the surface. There we go. And coming around. And I think the original aliens had no eyes, but you know, whatever. It's like a xenomorph inspired feature. So after the regular brush and the move brush, one of the 2 other brushes you'll use the most for clay, for digital clay and digital sculpting, are the crease brush down here and the flatten brush. So again, that's 2, 3, 4, 5 is flatten and 7 is crease. So if you look here, you got 5 flatten, 7 crease. Okay, so if I go to 5, go to flatten, you want to get rid of like that kind of chewed bubblegum, pillowy, kind of bubbly look that you get with clay, with both traditional and digital. And I keep it in the bracket keys after the P because that's usually how you make brushes bigger and smaller, but they opted to have a hold down the X button for whatever reason. So I want to chisel the temple region here and flatten it. You see, flatten brush really brings in those planes. You want major planes defined in your sculpture early on. You don't want to get too marshmallowy and lumpy with your sculpture. And once I get this a little closer to the shape I want, I'm going to go ahead and hit the retopologize button too. There we go. And hit back to 0, and I can continue to kind of pull these polygons out into shape. You see it's getting zigzaggy. They start crumpling and folding over in each other. Just hit smooth. And once it's fairly close like that, and I can see my quads are stretching beyond my comfort level, I'll go to the retopology tool, or the topology tool, multi-resolution, and go to voxel remesh, which keeps it all quad still. And remember, I dropped mine down way down to 16 and hit remesh. And there we go. Now it gave me a better mesh to handle the shape that I'm working with. So you see all the quads are roughly about, well, closer to the same size. I didn't say very much. And I can go back to the multi-resolution above, and I can subdivide it 1, 2. Oops, looks like I hit it way more than 2 times. There we go. And you see, same thing. I subdivide, 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 and now I have detail. So the flatten brush, if I make this a little bit more, oops, I wonder why my X key is not working. Let's see. Okay, seems like my X key is not working. So it's not a bad idea to save early on. So I'll go in here and save my SculptGL file, have my little temporary folder I keep on my C drive. We'll call it Xenomorph-ish. Right, not trying to do anything too specific yet. It's a .sgl file. There we go. And then sometimes you can refresh your browser, and we can go in here and go clear the scene, and I can go in here and I can add the SGL file that I just saved out. Just gotta, always do a good job remembering where your stuff's at. And I have it in my template. My mouse isn't showing up for some reason. That's really disturbing. And yeah, I'm just supposed to guess where my mouse is. Interesting. So yeah, clearing the space and saving and reloading it now fixes my tool. So sometimes you got to do that. You got to refresh your browser. Just remember, if you don't save, if you refresh that browser or you close that browser, your sculpture is gone. All right, so 7 on the keyboard. X to make my brush a little bit bigger or smaller. Now I can go through here and, oh, not the crease tool, I'm sorry, number 5, flat. There we go. And let me turn off the wireframe. We can kind of chisel some edges, right? So we want to get away from that pillowy look and really kind of shape this critter some more. 0 to pull. Always make sure you get closer to the axis when you pull, otherwise it will create some shapes that maybe you don't want. Go back to the lowest topology. Looks like my lowest subdivision disappeared somehow. Where's my... There it goes. Okay, and then I have multi-resolution. Okay, oops. Now we want to just divide. So let's see, delete higher and subdivide 1, 2, and 3. So now I have 4 different subdivisions. I can go down to this lowest one and grab with my grab brush here, make some different shapes. Remember, grabbing in the center is important if you want to avoid, if I grab from the edges and pull, I can get like really shapes I don't want. This little kind of crevice in the middle. So just be sure that you have it positioned where you want it. Okay, and then I can zoom back and I can kind of push down and shift to smooth. There you go. So I'm just kind of playing around with the shape a little bit, showing you the tools. Okay, so if I go back and subdivide it back up again, so the higher subdivision level, now I have all this detail. This is where I can now use the crease tool. So 5 is your flatten tool, right? So you want to kind of create large planes, kind of define where your planes are in the model early on. This should all be part of your process almost every time you sculpt any kind of organic form, character, creature, whatnot. Because it's one of the most common beginner's errors to look at a sculpture and you can see it's really pillowy and really kind of bubblegummy, and the artists may have some misgivings about abstract art. They might not appreciate or understand abstract art, and that's just something you have to fight. Your natural tendencies, if you have those tendencies, to not think that the abstract shapes aren't important. They're actually the most important. They're, all the detail in the world is not going to make a bad sculpture look better. There we go. So you see I'm getting some interesting shapes here. I'm just kind of playing with shapes. I don't have any reference in front of me. I could pull up a xenomorph or a Geiger, my Geiger book. But, it's so heavily referenced already. It's like, maybe break free from the Geiger thing a little tiny bit. There we go. So that's looking pretty darn interesting already. See, major shapes. And just pressing really lightly. If I need to, I can make it smaller. And then C, I can make the intensity lower as well if the intensity is too strong. Okay, so if I have defined my major planes using the flatten brush, the next most important brush is getting a little bit details, the crease brush. So this is like carving. So if I want to go in here and carve out some detailed shapes, let's see how that works. So if I'm going to carve my detail, what's nice about the digital is wherever I draw a line in to carve out some detail, I want to pull up a line next to it to really accentuate that change in form. And usually with the crease brush, you want it a bit smaller. And watch what happens here. So I want to follow the contours of these major planes that I just made. Right, so I'm going to kind of push in where the surface changes from this plane to this plane. That's where the light catches it. This is also your value when you're drawing, right? So if I go in here with the crease brush and I carve in, and when I get to the symmetry, I can do some really cool. You can like do some crisscross back and forth if you want. But yeah, it's going to really pull out that shape, right? And I'm on the highest resolution when I do this. Now, if I go back where I just put that line in and I hold Alt and go right next to it, it's going to really pop that surface change. It's going to accentuate that groove I just carved in there by creating a ridge next to it that flows into the flattened surface, right? So if I go back to flatten and go right to the edge here, make sure that flatten brush is kind of right, I can kind of smooth out that flattened surface into that contoured edge. Same thing on this, I can kind of smooth that out. Maybe go back to my crease tool again, 7, hold down the Alt key and very gently, just a little bit of pen pressure, I'm going to bring back up the ridge on the other side of the scoring mark or the carving mark that I just made in. Right, so there's core principles and types of sculptures. So there's carving, there's modeling, molding, there's different types of assembly. And what we're doing right now is we're kind of bridging the gap of these different sculptural techniques. Now, if I go back to one, if I go back to my main brush, make it a reasonable size here, and just very gently fill in the gap along that line. You see it's going to fill it in nicely and kind of get rid of any jagged space you might have in there. And then after I do that, I can hold the Shift key. And then as I hold Shift, it's going to switch to the smooth brush, and then I hold X to make it a little bigger, smaller to whatever size I need. And I haven't let my pinky finger off the Shift key yet. I'm just going to smooth out. I want to get rid of any jagged marks that have crept into my sculpture. Go back to 5 again to flatten, and I can chisel that back down again, flatten that edge. So I've kind of filled in the gap there. If I zoom back now, you can see how nice that shape plays in the lighting. It gets really visible, that little tiny line, because of the way I used the crease brush. So let's go ahead and let's make this kind of a chitinous type xenomorph following the planes that I made on there. So I'm going to go do a nice long, maybe make my brush a little bit smaller. And maybe we'll go underneath here. And there's a way to turn the grid on and off. And I think for right now, I don't necessarily need the grid. And for whatever reason, I am totally blinking. Oh, there it is, show grid off and on. There we go. So I want to look underneath this thing and not have my visual real estate hindered. I'm going to go underneath here where I did this nice long flow line. And let's accentuate that. So I'm going to go across here and go nice long stroke, not too fast because you don't want the brush to pick up on you. And I'll go underneath like a jawline, we'll call that like a jawline. And we'll go back behind where maybe the neck might connect. And then we'll do another like a hinge mark right here. Maybe that's where the jaw line will go. And then I can come down here and let's do a cut underneath here. So you see I'm kind of carving in a sharp line here. Now, right along where I did that line, let's do right away. Let's just hold down the X key. I can zoom in a little closer, so I have a nice big real estate here. Actually, before I do that, let's finish off where the shape might be separated. Let's go separate it right there, maybe. And then come back to that later. Okay, hold down Alt. And I'm gonna bring that edge out, that little ridge line, accentuate right along, go all the way down. If I could do it in one stroke, great. If not, let go, bring it over, zoom in a little bit. And if I zoom in, the brush stays the same size. So sometimes zooming in is beneficial. Sometimes it can throw you off. So go there, carve back in if I'm not sure. Go to the line up above it right here. And I'm gonna accentuate that line even more as well. Come around the top. There we go. Maybe since I did that, maybe carve back behind that line since I didn't do that before. I was not sure. A little bit more of an insectoid style. Oops, make sure I'm not going across to the ridge. Make sure I'm carving next to it, up against it to help that pop that out. And if I zoom in, boom, I just switch to up in there. I accidentally hit the masking key, I think. Okay, I'll come back to the front here and maybe carve out a few more lines. So I'll go up here to the front and we'll carve back here. We'll call that maybe the upper mandible. Hold down Alt, bring it back up some more. Maybe as well right here. And maybe carve back in. And at the front here, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to subdivide one more time at 82,000. Subdivide them out 331,000. And I'm kind of liking what I'm making here. So I'm going to save the SGL file And I'll save over the previous xenomorph, and we'll call this xenomorph-ish. Let's call this one O2. So I'm kind of doing an iterative save here so you can see the steps and the stages that go into doing a digital sculpture. All right, let's carve back in using the opposite. So holding Alt, I'm going to maybe carve back in some detail here and go back to 1, to the brush. I'm going to maybe fill in some more forms here, maybe on the brow region. And maybe I'll give him some eyeballs since the original xenomorphs I don't think had eyes. Hold down Alt, push in and make a cavity-ish for the eye socket. But remember, I'm at the higher resolution, higher subdivision right now. So that kind of gives me a little bit more working room. I can zoom in here, fill that out some more. I was studying making like an armadillo mask for one of my kids, and it was fun. I was studying the armadillo, like an armadillo up on there. They have a fun little nose. Go back to 7, the crease on the keyboard, and hold the Alt key, and I can bring that ridge back up and accentuate the shapes that I just made there. And maybe 1 to fill that in gently with the clay tool. Go back to 5, flatten. I can chisel that back down a little bit more if it gets real lumpy. Remember, X is really easy to just kind of make sure you're at the right brush size and screen zoom. Remember, the brush size stays the same size, which is really handy. And you can see it flicker. So if I go W, as I move, it goes to lower res, and then I let go, it goes back to higher res. That's the power, one of the main powerful things of subdivision geometry. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on here, so I'll just kind of continue. So I'll crease this back in here. Maybe this would be like an upper lip type of deal. Hold down Alt, bring that back out some more. Oops, kind of messed that up, so problem. Undo does work pretty well. Definitely can't get too happy with the undo buttons, but definitely work well. We'll go back here to the jaw. Maybe I'll carve this in a little. Maybe bring the jawline back here a bit more. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Hold the Alt key again. Bring them back. It's lower lip. There we go. And use the 1 key. Back to regular brush. I'll build up like a little bit more of a chin. And if I need to, I can go down the subdivision levels if it gets a little wonky in there. Hold down Shift, smooth it out a little bit. Make sure it's not getting too messed up. And I can go down the lowest subdivision, the absolute bottom here. And if I need to make major movements, watch what happens now. So here's all the detail. Okay, it's a fair amount of sculptural detail we started to add to it, right? So a little bit more pointed. I hadn't looked at it from the top or the bottom view. It's still very round. You can still see the remnants of the sphere. So I want to change that. What I can do is I can go to the lowest subdivision and go to my move tool, and I can make major changes to this sculpture. I can really push in the side of the head here. Let me zoom way back. Just kind of show you how much topological check radius, fault intensity is a bit strong. Maybe if I lower that down. There we go. I can kind of narrow the shape, the overall shape of the head quite a bit. Okay, so let's see what happened there. So I pushed that in massively right there at the back, almost like a temple region behind where the jaw is at. So if I go back up to subdivision level, see all the details still there. And whatever smoothness you had with the sculpt, it keeps it pretty well. Okay, so again, that's the regular brush, right? We did use the inflate just a little bit. Smooth is always shift. The flatten brush, number 5, super important to chisel and create your major shapes and forms, the major planar surface changes of your sculpture. The crease tools, like kind of the carving tool, that's what we use a detail to really knock out a lot of that detail. So Pretty happy with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this over to Sculptris, and we're going to take a look at that application. So let's take a look at what happens over there.